The procedure is on page 36 and 37.
Thank you.
Okay, and I got one more. And there's some sample problems on page 63 through 66.
I'm sorry, 63.
63 through 66, there are some sample problems. Kind of give you an idea how they're set up. Okay, first and foremost, how many of you are first-timers? Okay, most of you. All right, okay, good. All right, spontaneous. There are three types of problems. On the day of the competition, your young people will have one problem. Okay? First type of problem is verbal. It requires verbal responses. Example, it could have kings. King Kong, King Tut. This is the kingdom of something. And kingdom would be a creative answer. Spontaneous problems, when they are verbal, are judged as creative, which is 3 to 5 points depending on the problem, or common, that is 1 point. Okay, your kids, you need to practice this with them. You give them response cards. It is a plain index card. You will have 5 to 7 for each young person. If you'll pull up some of these sites on the resource sheet that I have, you will find out that there are lots and lots of sample problems there, and it will give you a good idea of how these operate. Whenever the young person, whenever your team member responds, you put this in the box. Okay? All right. Now, other type of problem is the hands-on, which means you manipulate materials. I'll explain this a little bit better later on. Okay. Hands-on problems a lot of times are judged, they are judged on creativity and teamwork, which I'll explain that a little bit later on too. And then the last type of problem is a verbal or verbal hands-on, which is considered a combo or hybrid problem, which means that you're using both verbal and hands-on skills. Okay. The trick to spontaneous is that you practice with your team. Okay. First and foremost, let's go ahead and talk about the day of the competition, and then I'll back up. Day of the competition, you will check in at the spontaneous check-in desk about 10 minutes ahead of the competition. We have a lot of teams that come through, and space is very, very scarce. So you only check in 10 minutes ahead of time. And your team will be given a card. It will be color-coded. This past competition, we had 15 different rooms judging. So we had to make sure we got the right team in the right place. We had color-coded cards. Okay, your kids will be given this one card to check in with the judge when it's time for their competition. They give the judge the card. Now, they're going to be asked what school they're from, what long-term problem is, and what their membership number is. The kids need to be the one to tell it. Let me tell you something. Your kids are so excited when they get spontaneous. They would agree with the fact they're Donald Duck at that time. They are so excited. I mean, they'll agree to anything. So anyhow, they go give this card to the judge. The judge will take them to an undisclosed location, have them compete, and then they're going to give back to you. But they can't tell you what they did. Everything you tell a child not to do is exactly what we do with them. You tell them not to talk to strangers, not to go off with strangers, and that's what we do. But we promise we'll take good care of them. Okay. They'll go to the competition site, and all 17 members may go. Very simply, they will be told that they have, what type of problem they have, and then you've got, the judges will be in one spot, the team members will be around the table more than likely, and then the two that are not participating, if you have 17 members, will be back behind them. So only 5 can participate in spontaneous. All right? They'll have 1 minute to decide who is competing on the 3 types of problems. They'll have one of the 3 types. Your kids will be done by division and by long-term problem. Everybody, let's say, that's in problem 1, division 1, even if it's a track A, they'll all have the same spontaneous problem on the tournament day. Now, if they're a different track, You know, if you're in a different track, we may have a different problem. So, you know, kind of give you an idea for that. Okay, they will compete, and then after they finish with competition, then they will be sent back down to you. Do not ask them what the problem is. Do not tell them not to tell anybody what the problem was, because the problems that your children encounter on spontaneous will be used all throughout the country. So they do not need to email, Twitter, Facebook, anything. Do not need to mention it, because somebody else may have that same problem and would give them an unfair advantage. So the problems are used, you know, over a large area. So make sure they do that. So they need to keep it secret until after World. Just ask them, did you do well, and leave it at that. If they have a problem, then they need to talk to the tournament director and see what the problem was.
Will they know their score then when they leave the room?
No.
Oh, so if you say, did you do well, it's just
You know,
guessing.
they have a feel like, oh man, we knocked that out of the ballpark. I mean, we really screwed up with it. I mean, they got an idea whether they did okay or I'm not really sure how we did. They'll have an idea. So anyhow, but that's the main thing. And you know, don't ask them, well, what type of problem they have? What, you know, just you know, well, how did it go? Well, we did real good or we didn't. But don't you make sure they don't talk about the problem, because I have been in the hallway when one team was leaving and said, boy, I'm glad we had that verbal problem. And I thought, man, you're meeting teams that may have that same problem. You know, they need to be quiet, because we've had to tell them in the hall as they were passing teams. So anyhow, but after that check-in desk and after your team is called, then you're going to go to another site. I think we'll go upstairs. You'll go back downstairs, and you will not stay up there, nor are you allowed to go with the kids. So anyhow, coaches are not allowed in the spontaneous room. Okay. All right, any questions? We're good to go. Okay. All right. So we understand, oh yeah, the spontaneous score will show up on your score sheet when you get your score after the tournament. But you will not get an individual sheet that shows you anything about spontaneous. It'll just show you what the score is. Spontaneous is worth 100 points. And that raw score is converted to a 100-point scale. The score room is the one that takes care of that. It's converted, so it's worth 100 points, which is a great thing, because spontaneous is the great equalizer. If your long-term didn't go well, doesn't matter whether it went well or not, because everybody's on the same wavelength when it comes to spontaneous. Doesn't matter. Everybody goes in, has no clue what the problem is, and then you compete. So, you know, one year somebody did the vehicle problem, their vehicle caught fire. So, I mean, you know, it's a bit of a problem there. I mean, you know, they ended up getting a real good award because of the fact that they overcame the diversity. Yeah, it's been a long day. Anyhow, but, you know, it didn't matter whether it went good or bad. This is the equalizer for them, so things will go well there. So anyhow, the main thing is we want them to have a good time with spontaneous. Okie dokie. All righty, let's see. How do we go about doing some stuff here? Okay, let's back up and we'll go into how you can practice with the kids. Okay, with a verbal problem in front of them at competition, there will be 2 copies laid in front of them so they can look at. We practice and put the examples out for them to look at. They need to follow along. When you practice with them with the samples laying out as to where they can read the directions. Each problem is as different as the people in this room, so they need to make sure they follow along and understand the instructions. If they're not sure, they need to ask questions. There are no penalties in spontaneous. The only penalty is time. Once time starts in a competition, it does not stop. So practice that with your team. How many of you have a countdown timer? If you do not have a countdown timer, you need to get one. Several people said their phone would do a countdown. Turn the timer to where the kids can see it, because when you go into the competition, they cannot carry a backpack, phones, watches, timers, paper, pen, pencil, coats. None of that is allowed. That is not us. That is at World. So that is from the International Problem Captain. So they just take nothing but themselves in.
So they will be able to see the problem. There'll be 2 copies in front of them to read. Mm-hmm. So when we practice, we can lay out 2 copies of the problem question for them.
Right.
And before they even start, and that can include examples.
Well, now the thing is, let's say you're acting like it's a tournament, and you just put them face down on the table, and you'll say, this is a verbal problem. You have 1 minute to decide which 5 team members will compete. And as soon as you're practicing, as soon as your team is ready, you flip it over, and then you read the problem. And you'll read all the way through it. And then if it's one that comes from the OBM folks, actually there'll be a couple more lines that you'll go back and reread. In other words, what the specific problem is, and usually it's at the first what the problem is. Let's say, you are given kings. What type of kings are there? And then your last line would be name kings. So, in other words, that would be what you do. And start the timer, and, or most of the time they'll have like a minute to think, and then you reset the timer, and then they give their response.
Will there be a timer in there for them so that they can know what time it is? Or they have to
Oh, yeah. In other words, you need to have a timer for you to practice with them and turn it where they can see it, because we're going to have a timer when it comes to competition.
Okay.
And it's going to be turned to where they can see it. So you don't need anybody doing the timing. They need to concentrate on their responses.
So the 1 minute to decide which 5 are competing, is that before or after they look at the problem?
That's before they look at
So
the problem.
they have a minute to decide, a minute to read the problem, and then go.
Well, no. They come in and we read and say, this is a verbal problem. You have 1 minute to decide which 5 team members will compete. Well, usually they've already decided by that, and so the 2 that are not participating, assuming you have 7, will sit over here. Then you got your team members, and you flip the problem over.
And the judge reads it to them, right?
Right.
And they
In other
can
words,
follow along.
Yeah, because when they get to the competition, there's going to be 3 judges in that room. Usually you've got the judge that comes to pick up your team. Then you've got a judge that's called the reader judge.
Okay.
And then the other judge is the one that controls the timer. Because, see, you've got the 1 minute to think, so you have to reset the timer. Then you have usually a minute or 2 that's your think time, which is when you can ask questions. And then when you get ready, let's say you have 3 to 5 minutes to give your responses, depending on the problem. Then the timer's got to be reset again, which means you've got one judge that their job is strictly to set the timer.
So I wasn't in the room last year as an assistant coach. Obviously, judges can't go in the room, but they were primary. And so I wasn't able to see yet.
Yeah, primary is a beast all its own, and that's why we did a separate session, because it's confusing to people. Well, I got to go last time, and well, you did primary. This is, if you're Division 1 through 4, it's done differently.
But my understanding was that once they got in and they read the problem, they can't discuss it between themselves.
Depends. And I'm not trying to be ugly with you or trying to be short with you. Some problems they can talk, some they cannot. Every problem is as different as the people in this room. That's why I say, if you have looked at some sample problems, every one of them is so very different. Some you can talk, some you can't. There are some hands-on problems that you can't talk during. They're just very, and I'm not trying to be vague with you. They're each one of them.
That was, I practiced one with my kids the other day, and I wasn't sure how this would work out in an actual competition, where it was hands-on, and I think part verbal, in that I had to divide my kids up, and a couple of them were the leaders, and they had to figure out how to do the hands-on without nonverbal, and they had to discuss it, and I just couldn't figure out, like, how does that get judged? Like, this is supposed to be a spontaneous problem. We've never seen this before, and I wasn't sure during that time period. Are they timed during as soon as you read this, does that timer start?
As soon as they finish and read what the problem is, then they say time begins and they start scoring them. Now, with what you're talking about with that hands-on type problem, odds are that they were being judged with creativity and with teamwork, which a lot of times is a component that is used with hands-on and verbal hands-on. But never with verbal, because I mean, a straight verbal problem, I mean, what kind of teamwork do you have if you're given a verbal response? I mean, I'm not trying to be sarcastic, but if it's a verbal hands-on, you may be given all these different odd things that you're to build this structure, or you're to build this costume or this critter or whatever, and then you're telling a story around what it was you built, which would be, you're manipulating stuff, but at the same time you're talking about it. Does that make sense?
Sort of. I'm just making sure that if they know, they can listen to each other and build off of each other's, but they're not supposed to, in that time period that they're reading the question. The questions are supposed to be, after they've read it, they're verbal question, they're verbal spontaneous. The questions are directed to the judges, not between each other,
Right.
to come up with answers.
They can ask the judge whether they can talk amongst themselves, and if the judge allows them, there is a solution to the problem that we can discuss among the team members who are.
So they'll know what
Yeah,
they can
and she's
discuss.
right. I mean, so they're so very, and I'm not trying to be vague with
Directions are
you.
very specific. So the big thing is getting them to listen to the directions so
Yeah.
that they do exactly what it
It's
says.
true
It
for
lays
all
it
of
right
us.
out. It'll say, you're not allowed to talk, or asking questions counts against your time, or you may talk among your teammates, or it usually is pretty clear,
It's very specific,
you know.
in which they'll know that because that's on that paper there. It says you have 1 minute to think, and you may not talk, or you may talk. So, I mean, it's, yeah.
I have one question. When the two people that are not part, I mean, would there be another team or just the only team? I mean,
They're the only team in there.
And what would happen to the two guys that are sitting on the side? You know, like, would they be judged? You know, like if they get too excited and say like, hey, you know, start talking or whatever the case is.
The only thing is that once time starts, it does not stop. There are no penalties of spontaneous. Actually, the only penalty you have is time. Once time starts, it does not stop.
Okay.
So if you have to say, excuse me, you need to be quiet, or no talking, or whatever, you have cut into their time. And just like all of a sudden, blue sky. Now, what did I just do when I said blue sky to you all with your mindset? Okay, what did I do? I lost you, didn't I? You thought, man, what's you doing with that? Everyone was losing their mind. In other words, whenever you have to stop them because they're talking or whatever, you have lost your train of thought. And you think about it, you've got a short period of time, those kids have got to give those answers, and they're like, oh man, I got to hurry up, I got to get this done. But whenever you've had to call somebody down or tell them no talking or whatever, what have you done? You have just blown
Okay.
their mindset.
So it is.
Does that answer your question?
Right, right.
Yeah.
So when we kind of, you know, like practice with them, we do have to, you know, help them understand that, you know, the two guys play important role by being silent over there.
Right.
Can they opt to leave the room?
Yeah, personally, I prefer they stay in the room, and the reason for that is because, number one, we got no place to put them, and they're going to have to stand out in the hall like they've been bad. Just because they didn't want to stay in the room doesn't mean that it looks like they've been bad because they have to go stand in the hall. You remember when a kid was bad, what do? You put them in the hall. But there are some kids we know that just cannot be still, and your kids know each other as to, little Johnny just can't be still, he's just hyper or whatever. But the thing is, I have noticed a lot of times the non-participating members, you think about these kids have worked hard. They have worked for how many months? They are a team. They are together. You can feel the energy coming off of them whenever you're judging a lot of times. Even though they're not participating, you can feel the fact that, okay, I got your back, baby. I'm right here. It does make a difference. So I prefer they stay in the room, if at all possible. But if you got a kid that just can't cut it, then, you know, no problem. So, I mean, it does happen. You know your kids, and they know each other as to whether the child needs to stay or not. So, anyhow. All right, anybody else? We all squared away? Okay, all right. Hadn't lost you yet. Hadn't terrified you. Okay, all right, good shot. Okie dokie, all right, we know about the common and creative answers. Okay, how can you come up with creative answers? You know what? Sometimes it's all in your delivery. Maybe you got somebody that can sing, or maybe they go just very dramatic, or maybe they use all these motions and stuff. You know, a lot of times that can help make the delivery be creative. Judge this past spring and had a kid that kept using an accent. That was great, except the one time, I think it was supposed to be Australian. Honey, we couldn't understand what he said, had to ask him what he said. Because it was understand. That's right, cut into time. The only response that judges are going to give in a verbal problem is that if they did not understand what the child said, they're going to say, please say again, unclear. That is the only response. Those of you that said you have done OEM as a child, used to be there were 3 responses. There is now only one, that being the unclear. Please say again.
It's not even said. They don't even say duplicate if they're in.
Duplicate is, you can use a duplicate. It's no big deal.
You want it better.
Yeah, duplicate and inappropriate are out the door. They do not use them. They haven't used them in 3 years. 3 years it won't. So, I mean, they're out. So if a child says something inappropriate and the judge has a problem with it, they're just probably going to mark it common and keep on going. If you get stuck and somebody uses the same answer someone else has already done, they're not going to say give another answer. You can actually use that answer and keep on going. It's just going to be a common answer. Which, if those of you that have done this before, you know if somebody gets stuck, it's like time just goes forever and, you know, you're about panic. Stress to your team members to not sit there and get so antsy and move your fingers or whatever and scare everybody to death. Because the thing is, that agitation actually makes it bad for the kids. Because they're already irritated to start with. I mean, they're already upset because they lost their train of thought. Thank you. Okay, now, let's see. Make sure the kids speak up. They speak clearly. If you have I forgot to tell the rest of them, but if you have a child that has some type of disability, you need to make sure that you note that on the form so that we know, do you have someone that needs an elevator, or do you have someone that has a hearing problem or a sight problem or whatever. So we need to be aware of that. Okay, all right, thing is practice, 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 practice. The more you practice, the better off you are. Heard a lot of people say that the fact that since they're in school, that they'll actually do a verbal spontaneous problem to start with, because that kind of helps settle the kids down, you know, and get their mind set and everything. Or maybe do it during snack time, or maybe you are kind of getting a stalemate point on working on long term, then go ahead and do a problem or two, spontaneous problem or two. Now, the thing is, if you've got 17 members, why don't you have 5 participate? Why don't you have the other 2 judge them? Keeping in mind that you and the other two members could judge. The thing is, are you going to get an outside help? The answer is no, because what you could do is after you get through, you all sit down and talk about, well, why was that creative? Or why, you know, well, you could have said whatever. Talk about it. All 8 of you talk about it, and you know, kind of try to get you some juices going. And those creative juices might help you on long term. You never know.
And within the verbal, it's in a pattern like down the line. And if it stops
Usually.
at one child, you don't move on. Is that correct?
That's right. That's right.
So that ends. That's it.
Yeah,
One
now-
goes out and you're done.
Right. Well, now your ace in the hole is. Tell me the other one. Okay. You're gonna fix me up. Okay. Your ace in the hole is very simply that they can repeat an answer. Where, so those of you that came through as youth, you obviously could not repeat an answer. It's going to be a common, regardless of what the first answer was. But then the thing is, at least it gets it off your back, and you know the monkey's gone, so it gives you a few minutes. Usually there's a pattern. If it doesn't say, then I guess you could go in any direction. But a lot of times, kids that have worked on spontaneous problems many times in practice, it's obvious because they have a particular direction they like to go. But I mean, it will specify as to what type direction. Sometimes it has been known to, maybe if you get a die and roll it and number your seats. Because you got a certain number of cards.
They have
you got
those practice ones on OM too.
Right, well you've got a certain number of response cards. We've already talked about response cards, right?
Well, can you elaborate
Well-
more about the response cards?
Okay, all right, okay, just a second. But if you've got a die, okay, you've got a certain number of response cards, and you've got a die, and you roll it, and you're in seat number 1, and it comes up 1, then it's your response. And if you get a 6, then it's whoever's left. So you could practice with that too, or whatever. In other words, who wants to go? It could be a freedom of choice. Okay, in verbal and verbal hands-on, you are given an index card. It is a plain index card.
One per child?
No.
One.
You got 1 color per child, and you're going to have anywhere between 6 and 7 response cards, because on verbal problems there are now a fixed number of responses, and most verbal hands-on has a fixed number. So you're going to have a card. Whenever they give their response, they're going to put the card in the box or the designated areas to where they're supposed to put it. Now, the problem will tell you as to whether they put it in before they answer, after they answer, or as they're answering. It'll be very specific as to that. So that's why the kids need to follow along and make sure they're following directions. And if they're not sure, they can always ask. Okay, and when they're out of cards, they're out of responses. Okay, for those of you that have done this years ago, there was an unlimited number of responses, right?
I didn't quite get that. So each team member is going to get a stack of cards,
They're going to get
Like
6 or 7 cards
okay.
of 1 color.
and so they'll have 5 different colors.
Yes.
So when it's their turn, the problem will tell them before, during, or after, but when they do a response, they put a card in the box. So that's, I guess, your guys' way of also keeping track of how many responses happen.
It's a double check for the judges. It's also a way to slow the teams down to where the judges can judge. And it also is a great equalizer. Because years ago, I judged a team, that was when they had unlimited responses, judged a team that they gave like 70, 80 responses in like 3 minutes. They were like a machine gun going off. I mean, oh my Lord, it was hard to keep up. But the thing is, they were all common. But if you give enough
count the answers,
responses, you got a bunch of points. You had like 70 points. Well, see, now if you got only 7 responses. In other words, if you got 7, you got a total of 35 points. Well, let's say you do 35 cards in there, and you have got 10 that are creative, that are at 3 points, that's 30 points, and then you got another 25 that are others. So, I mean, you've racked up some points right there. Or let's say half of them, or let's say 20 of them are creative. They're looking for more creative answers. They're looking for the better answers rather than having the volume.
Right, or if they blow through 35 and still have a minute left, well then obviously they've wasted some of their points. They got all commons.
But you're not going to get extra points if you do not use all the materials on a hands-on, nor if you have time left on a verbal. You do not get extra credit for not using your time. In other words, you're right. In other words, you could conceivably have not used your time as wisely as you should have, or to your best advantage. So anyway, okay. All right, any questions? Okay, you understand response cards. That's where the verbal and possibly the verbal hands-on. Okay, now, verbal hands-on, all sorts of weird things you got around the house, folks. I use the example of we have a brown ceramic insulator that's about 110 years old. Came on, and anyhow, if you flip it over, it makes a wonderful candle holder. It has a nice little tray on it and everything. It looks a nice looking thing. I loaned that to the lady that was coaching where I worked. And anyhow, kids had a good time with it. I used that example earlier. One lady said, I got a candle holder. Said it's actually a hog scraper. She said, hey, I can take that thing to school to see what the kids think about it. You've got stuff around your house that's kind of odd. Take that odd stuff. You can do your own problem right there. Or you can go to the dollar store. Paper plates, straws, spaghetti, sticky notes, string, clay, balloons, toothpicks, paper clips, construction paper, plastic fruit. Had several problems the other year that were a bunch of plastic fruit. What do you do with the plastic fruit? In other words, you could do different uses of it. You could do, tell a story about the fruit or whatever. I mean, there's lots of things you could do. Okay, but you need to be sure that if it's a verbal hands-on, they need to be sure and pick up the object. Usually it will tell you whether or not you can destroy it or not. A lot of times, if you cannot destroy the object, it'll have a little yellow sticker on it, and it'll tell you. Okay, all right. Are we so far so good?
I just have one question.
Okay.
So you mentioned about the plastic fruit instead of the verbal response can be a story also if it falls within the parameters of like what's being asked.
I actually have heard of some teams that obviously they had practiced this quite well. That it did not say to tell a story, but with their verbal hands-on, they actually told a story.
Oh, okay.
Each response string you to the next one.
They actually told a story. And if you think about it, all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, that really gets quite creative there with that, which, I'm sure they did well score-wise. But the thing is, obviously they had been practicing that, which told you that was a well-practiced team, otherwise they would not have been able to do that. Because that's the one thing about spontaneous, you can tell how well coached a team is. It obviously comes out as to how they do. And I mean, I'm not trying to take anything away from you guys, because I would not want your job for anything in the world. But,
I'm not so sure I want my job.
I'm not going to go there. I don't have a job, so I'm not going to go there. But anyway. Okay, all right, are we ready for hands-on? Okay, hands-on. Listen to the judge's directions. The written is always going to be in front of them no matter what type of problem it is. Ask questions. If they're not sure, ask questions. They just have to be careful when they're asking questions. If it's during the competition time, they're actually cutting into their time, so they need to be careful what they're doing. And hands-on, anything goes. They can build, communicate, ability to work together, cooperate, interaction, accepting ideas, sharing. They need to make sure they've got a lot of participation. Scoring, more points, more answers type thing. Okay, now let me explain something. As the problem is in front of your kids, be sure and tell them that on competition day, this is not practice, this is competition, if the judges point to a particular line, if the judges reread one of the lines, ladies and gentlemen, that is a red flag that your kids did not understand the problem. They are going in the wrong direction. Judges cannot tell your kids what they're doing wrong. They can just reread or point to where the problem is. In other words, this is where the misunderstanding is coming from. Because if they were to explain to them what they're doing wrong, would be outside help, and on top of that, they may be offering them a solution, which we all know is a no-no, right? So, anyway, make sure your kids are familiar with that. And somebody suggested earlier today, actually Tom Hansen, to why not pull up one of these problems online that you know is too hard for your kids, that you know they're going to not understand it, and deliberately do that, and then you can show them where they messed up. In other words, where is their misunderstanding level, which would be a great thing so that they understand that if a judge does that to them, then it's a red flag that they have a problem.
So what does the judge do? What will the judge do?
In other words, let's say that, you know, that's where they messed up. They got the problem good down to there, and then that's the part where they messed up. In other words, the part they didn't understand. They got confused. That is where you would point out. So in other words, see if you could find something that you know is probably too hard for them, and then where they have a problem, point that out to them. In other words, they keep reading it and whatever, then when time's up, then tell them what their problem was. In other words, this is it. So that way at competition day, if they hear that, then they know what the problem is. Yes?
If they're doing a problem and one of the kids maybe has steered them in the wrong direction, can another kid point to it just to make them look at it?
Oh, that happens a lot.
Okay.
But that also tells you that's a well-coached team in that you've got, they're always checking up on each other. Okay, whoa, we're in the wrong direction. But that's why it's in front of them, because we all know that you have auditory learners, we all know that you have visual learners, and then you have some that we're not sure exactly where they fit on the scale of stuff. And so that's why it's read to them, and that's why it's also in front of them, depending on what type of person you have there. Okay, all right, now, all righty, let's see. Okay, where would you be doing with hands-on or verbal hands-on, they may be doing creativity. What do the judges look for in creativity is variation of a solution. Team interaction, did they build on each other's strength? Did they show on-the-spot problem solving? Creative use of communication, humor, drama, mime. Creative use of design, organization, coherence, how well did they put the parts together to make a whole? Did they do risk-taking? Okay, and that's all with creativity. In other words, did they have a solution? Did they enhance the solution? Was there a good thought process here? Was the solution obvious, or was it a paramount excellent solution? In other words, that's what you would, what the judges would be looking for. Okay, judging teamwork, cooperative spirit, positive attitudes, reinforcement of all team members, absence of negativism. Teams identified roles. Tasks were divided equally among the teams. Among the team. A leader's role is identified immediately or at some point in time. Roles may have been pre-assigned prior to arrival of the problem. It's nice to have a leader, but don't have a dictator. You want to where everybody is. I encountered that judging a tournament this spring. One young lady said, we're not going to do it that way. Well, guess what? The rest of them offered the solution that everybody else had done. It would have solved the hands-on problem. But because she insisted we're not going to do it that way, in part two, you couldn't touch any of the objects except the rope. Well, she hadn't attached anything. So in part two, they got 0 because they could not propel anything. And then they were mad because I understand they were the number one team on the long term, but they absolutely, because they listened to Miss Bossy here.
Well, that's part of the coaching and the teamwork and getting them to.
Well, the kids kept trying to tell her, and hey, man, I ain't heard a thing you said. I am not paying any attention to you, was basically what she was doing. And basically, she cooked her team. So, that may be something for you guys to try to work on to make sure that does not happen. I can't say it won't happen, but hopefully, as Barney Fife says, hopefully you nip it in the bud. And
they decide who the 5 kids are, right? So they might be able to pick up on them before.
Well, they kept trying to tell her, but you know how some people just don't hear a thing. She didn't hear a thing. So anyhow, but yeah.
Oh, yeah. But if you only have 5 kids, you'd be stuck.
Yeah.
No one's telling that girl she's not doing it.
What's
Girl
that?
who's that bossy, no one's telling her she's not doing spontaneous.
Yeah.
She's doing spontaneous.
Maybe.
Person that
I have
pulls that
one. I have one of those.
Yeah. You know, well, this was middle school age too. I thought, Lord have mercy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Acceptance of ideas. In other words, okay, there was a lot of sharing in that example I gave you. There was a lot of sharing. And the thing is, the rest of the kids, they had the solution. But she was totally unreceptive. She did not hear a thing they said. And so the thing is, okay, of course they got nailed on teamwork because, I mean, the rest of the team tried to work well, but then they had one that just would not listen. It was not open. In other words, okay, do you have diversity of ideas? Are they being discarded or are they being implemented? The ability to work through disagreements in a constructive rather than destructive manner. Obviously, they sucked at that one, so what can we say? Ability to work in a solution together utilizing the combined skills of all team members. Ability to come to a consensus for the purpose of solving a problem. And I know I hit you with a lot of stuff real fast, but I was trying to make sure I get it all in. Okay. Judges' decisions are subjective. There is no appeal and spontaneous. If there is a problem, the tournament director will get in touch with me and I will answer their question and they'll get back in touch with you. But you do not have any interaction whatsoever with the judges. I am the only one that does. And I will answer as to what my judges did. I mean, the book starts and stops with me. So anyhow, do what? Yeah, they called me, I don't know, somebody said I was a spontaneous guru. I said, I don't know about that, but anyway. Okay, but just make sure your kids know that once time starts, it does not stop, and that time is their enemy in this case, and time is their penalty, and so they need to, you're right, they need to use their time wisely.
Real quick about repeating. It still baffles me that they're allowed to do that. But if they repeat exactly word for word, they still get a point for it?
Let's say he gives the answer, and let's say that you give me a great answer and it's creative. Okay, you got 3 to 5 points depending on what the problem calls for. Okay, you are like, I am totally stuck, have no clue what to do, and so in a desperation that time does not just dwindle away to nothing, you're going to do what? Copy his answer. So he got 3 to 5, you're just going to give 1, but you're going, boy, the monkey's off my back now. Maybe I can come up with a better answer for the next time.
But what if, like, the next person repeats it?
Well, there's a lot of
You know, that's the fallacy with this, that
Right.
you could conceivably have 30, you could have 29 of the same answer that the first one was.
Right.
But then, you know, you're only going to get 30 points, which means you have basically shot yourself in the foot, so to speak, to start with.
Right.
So it's better than no answer.
Exactly.
Waste of time.
Right. But now, the thing is, you know, I would say, that's why I say, think about what is it your kids like? Do they like movies? Do they like video games? Do they like books? You know, what is it that every one of your team members has something that they really like? Maybe it's a sport or whatever. Have them in the back of their mind, have them a safety net of what is it they can come up with an answer. Ladies and gentlemen, it may be an off-the-wall, totally off-the-wall answer, but did you know what? That off-the-wall answer may be quite creative.
And that was a problem. I didn't know how to answer my team this past week. So we did just a spontaneous, a quick one to get it going, like name things that are purple, right?
Fine.
And they came up with, you know, common things that were purple, but then somebody looked at me and they're like, well, can I name things that I pretend are purple, like purple kangaroos in my purple room? And I'm like, I don't know. So with a response like that, is that considered?
That's creative. The trick to spontaneous is, if it doesn't say you can't do it, you can do it. The sky's the limit. There are no limits.
They were coming up with some crazy off-the-wall things, and I think, and I, as an adult, I'm like, man, there's nothing purple like that, but they were all over.
It's cheese and bacon. We call it their happy place. Think of something that makes you happy, it's an activity place. When you get stuck, just blurt that out. Doesn't have to make sense. Just say it.
Or doesn't it have to somehow relate to the problem? I guess.
It does, but if they're stuck. This was before I knew that they could just duplicate somebody else's. And it was
Right.
just something so ridiculous installed, just cheese.
But you know, I don't recommend the duplicate. I mean, you could do it because, I mean, I had a coach the other year. They said, well, you know, literally you could say, you know, have 10 people say the same answer. That's true. But the point is, why not, like you said, they've got some perspective, something, like you said, is their happy place. Let them say that, and by George, you may have a creative answer there. You never know.
I said cheese. I'm like, okay.
Okay, well, just like several years ago, we had a problem on aliens.
On what did
Aliens. And we had one judge, and I was like, I can't believe that judge did not know that. Anyhow, one kid said Area 51. Whoa, okay. And one judge afterwards said during break said, what's Area 51? I thought, come on now, how do you not know that at your age? But I didn't say that to him, is what I was thinking. But the thing is, I was surprised. If you think about a child that you would encounter in school age right now, now that's pretty cool, because you're talking about, what, 50 years ago, which was not bad. So, I mean, hey. But, I mean, yeah, it was a creative answer. So, I mean, you know, you just never know where these kids, you don't know what all they've come in contact with. You don't know what their perspective is, and sometimes they will fool you.
Internet can do that to you.
Now, will the
Yeah, that's true,
judges, will the judges confer with each other afterwards if there's any, like, they come up with things that I don't know what they're talking about because it's slang to me, I don't know, but,
No, the judges are taught to be consistent all day. In other
Right.
words, the thing is, you
but
know,
after the team leaves, if the judge who is keeping score needs clarification, will they look at another judge and be like, do you know what that
all three
meant?"
of them keep score. There
Okay.
are three judges that keep score.
Okay.
There's one that goes against the kids. There's one that actually does the reading of the problem, which may or may not be more than, it might be one person has more than one hat. And then you have one that's setting the timer, because you have to set it for the 1 minute of the team members. You have to do it for the think time, and then you have to reset it for the competition time. So in other words, there's one person, and that's their job. They score too, but their job is to do the timer. And since it's a countdown timer, then they don't have to monitor the timer. It's set, they hit start.
And the time that they get within the problem itself varies from problem to problem.
Right. And that's why I say, if you look at these samples, you'll see that they are so very different. And I've had a lot of coaches that have told me, said, you were very evasive. You did not give us a direct answer. And I'm thinking, there's so much gray area in this. There's a lot of it, what I've told you is cut and dried. But every problem is so very different that there's not a distinctive yes or no to.
Do you recommend that as coaches in the beginning with teaching them the spontaneous, that we go straight into timing them, or give them some leeway so that they could get used to getting the answers out?
How do your kids do?
How old are they?
They're all fourth graders, but
I'd almost say time them and let them realize that there is a constraint here that I need to learn to work around, instead of, hey, I can just leisurely take my time, I got all the time in the world. Well, no, you don't.
But you can also use that as a goal setting type thing, where if they get eight responses out the first time, then you can try again and say, let's see if we can get more than 8. And they can see their progress too.
I think I'm consistent.
That's okay. That's okay.
There's a quick question.
Sure.
In the thinking portion of, especially the verbal responses, are they allowed to write anything down? Or is it-
No. They cannot write anything. They cannot take any paper or pencil in there with them.
That's gone.
Which I would suggest, since they cannot take paper and pencil in there, you do not need to have them sit down and write down their responses. I've had a lot of folks that say, well, I usually have my kids sit down and write their stuff. Well, hello, on competition day, they can't do it. So you probably are doing them a disservice, because they have, what do you mean I can't write anything down? I can't bring my little notepad in here and do that? The answer is no. So you're better off practicing with them just cold turkey, so to speak, and then that way they'll know what to expect. Because you think about competition day, they have no clue what type problem it's going to be. The only thing is, when they watch terminology in the description there, that you want them to have a positive experience, you want them to do well, you don't want to hurt them to start with, and you just have them in tears when they're leaving.
So the problem is not necessarily to be related to your own problem.
No. Could be anything. You never know.
I don't want to go too far.
No, you have to kind of see what I got. I have to kind of see what I have to work with as to what gets chosen.
Are there examples of the hands-on problems in these links here?
The Virginia link in particular has got it broken down as to verbal hands-on, and they've got,
Do the examples show typically like how many responses they would be asked for in certain problems?
I would think so.
Some of them do, they'll say, give me 6 cards.
Okay, I was just curious, just
But they
to
don't
prep
always
on.
give you, some of them, they don't give you solutions. Like there's a toxic swamp one, they have to get across. I mean, there's a lot of them where they don't give you how to do it, so if kids can't figure it out. It's like, we're still trying to figure something out.
Okay, but who's to say that, let's say I solve a problem. Let's say this gentleman solves a problem.
Yeah, it's different.
Okay, how come my solution is better than yours? Who's to say?
There's no right answer.
Right, and that's what I was getting at. Because, who's to say, how did I go about solving it? Did all my team members use this?
Yeah.
And, or was your solution more creative than mine? I mean, who's to say which is the right answer? Because I'm sure you and I would not come up with the same solution to something. Probably not. So anyway, I hope I have not scared you guys, and it's really a lot of fun, and just practice with the kids, and do wish you all the very best, and look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay.